Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
A big warm welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. It seems everywhere we turn at the moment, there is yet another scary cybersecurity story. But many of them just continue to go over people's heads. I mean, yes, it's scary, but how can we understand how to protect ourselves when it's told in a language that many people watching just don't understand? Step forward award-winning and globally recognised cybersecurity expert Jason Hart. Now, you may have already seen him because he's been on the BBC, ITV, CNN, Fox News, CNBC, Sky News and BBC World News, to name but a few, in numerous appearances, all informing and educating audiences about cybersecurity issues, but in a language that we can all understand. So buckle up, hold on tight, because I'm going to beam your ears all the way to Bristol here in the UK, which is home to Banksy, Massive Attack and Portishead for our American listeners. But we're not here to talk about music. We're going to talk about cybersecurity today with Jason Hart. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Jason. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yes, so my name's Jason Hart and I'm the CTO for the data protection division of Gemalto.
Now, I think most of us are relatively naive when it comes to online security. I mean, if we have antivirus and malware protection, nothing could go wrong, right? But I think things are not quite that simple anymore. And as the CTO in charge of identity and data protection with security company Gemalto, you recently demonstrated how hackers could be monitoring an unsuspecting surfer's web activity, even if they're close by. I mean, can you expand on your findings there?
Yeah, of course, no problem at all. So, there is generally, between different types of user base that people believe, and there's this misconception if they, have a firewall and antivirus that they're actually protected from the bad guys. With that particular experiment that I conducted, that was using Wi-Fi, and ultimately what I was doing what we call a karma attack. I had the ability to basically pretend to be any Wi-Fi. And what that does, or just to put that in context, every single Wi-Fi enabled device that we have keeps a memory of the trusted Wi-Fis that it's connected to. So, for example, Neil, you would, automatically connect to your trusted Wi-Fi at home or in the office or in different parts of the world. So your devices are always looking for that trusted Wi-Fi that you've connected to in the past. What I can do is I can see that information, and then real-time automatically, I can become that trusted Wi-Fi that you've connected to in the past and get your device to connect to me unknown to yourself directly to me. So if you were to look at your device, it would say that you're connected to that particular bad guy, or in this case, Jason, for the experiment, unbeknown to you. And you could be the train station, but connected to your home Wi-Fi. And all of this happens transparently and invisibly to you or the user itself. Now, once I've done that part of the attack, or in this case, the experiment, I have the ability then to do something called a man-in-the-middle attack. Because you're connecting via me, or in this case, the bad guy has the ability to potentially intercept and see potentially sensitive information, or in fact get you to do things which you wouldn't normally do. Because I'm in the middle of you and where you're trying to connect to on your device, I can say, Neil, I require a password for you to type in. I can get you to type that password in. I would actually see that password in clear text. You would then get a failed connection, but then ultimately I could go to that website or that application or cloud service you're trying to log into, use that password and username, and I'm in.
Wow, now you've made me very nervous. So I've got to ask, are you reliant on me performing some kind of action, as in downloading an attachment or clicking a dodgy link, or you can just do that quite easily?
No, not at all. In fact, you wouldn't even know this is doing, if you've got a mobile phone or a tablet, if the Wi-Fi is always on, continuously on, even when it's switched off, it's still looking for what we call a trusted Wi-Fi. So in fact, it can be in your briefcase, or your phone could be in your suit jacket, and I can force it to connect.
Wow. So how can people protect themselves from this?
Yeah, fantastic question, Neil. So the advice I give to everyone is that, don't have your Wi-Fi switched on until you actually need it switched on. Because, we all tend to, and, I'm even to blame to this, I have my Wi-Fi on and, I do see my phone sometimes connect to Wi-Fi's, which I go, well, hold on. My best advice to any individual or any person or organization is to, when you're not using Wi-Fi on your mobile device or tablet, is to disable Wi-Fi, just switch it off. If you're out in a public area, try and use your 4G where you can.
Now, I also believe that you highlighted in the media how criminals can easily suck that information out of smartphones using public Wi-Fi networks. And as someone that, as soon as he lands in a foreign country, will look for the free airport Wi-Fi, that's a bit of a concern. So can you offer an overview on that topic too? And are people really still oblivious to the dangers of connecting a device to a public network when getting their free Wi-Fi fix? Because I think many times that's all people care about, isn't it? I just want to connect and get my emails through. But are they completely unaware still, do you think?
Yeah, it's the same principle as the previous example I give you. So the first example would be, when you connect to that public Wi-Fi, how do you know it's actually a public Wi-Fi? How do you know it's not a bad guy actually masquerading being that public Wi-Fi? So that's the first point. The second point is, if a bad guy is potentially connected to a public Wi-Fi as well, he's essentially connected on the same piece of wire that you're connected on. So again, he can actually see all those other devices connected and start potentially conducting attacks.
Wow. Oh, mate, you're making me question absolutely everything now and every time I connect. How do you manage this? I know you travel around the world and you do go to the States a lot. Are you automatically cautious around Wi-Fi? And which do you decide which ones you do connect and which ones you don't?
Yeah, so I'm no different to anyone else. I'm Wi-Fi hungry. I land after an 8, 7 hour, 12 hour flight. I need to connect. It's just the way of the world we are today. Yeah. So for me, the certain things, ultimately, what a bad guy's after is the username and password. So I ensure that, every login credential I use is actually enabled with one-time password or multi-factor authentication, also known as two-factor authentication, because ultimately, in the first instance, the easy one for a bad guy ultimately getting Neil's username and password, or anyone's usernames and password. So basically, if we can remove what we call the static password away from the bad guy and replace it with a random one-time password, that's our first line of defense, because everything we do online now requires a username and password. And it's very, very simple for the bad guy to masquerade and to give up what I call static password. What I mean by a static password is you may have a password and you may be forced to change it every 30, 60, 90 days. But ultimately, that's still static. So ultimately, it's a password that you use in multiple locations, multiple times. By replacing it with a one-time password, at the point you go to use that password, it's a random one-time password. And once you've used it once, it cannot be used again. So in the event that a bad guy is trying to do some trickery to capture that password, if he does happen to capture it, it's a one-time password and you've used it already. So he may think he has that password, he goes to use it, but it's invalid at that point in time.
So I also was going to ask, as a former ethical hacker with decades of experience in InfoSec and someone who has created technologies to thwart those bad guys and cyber criminals, how are threats evolving now? And I would imagine that you guys have to evolve with it as well to stop it. So what steps can both individuals and businesses take to prevent themselves from being just another cyber attack victim?
Yeah, so I'm not going to blind you with facts and numbers, but I kind of want to focus on a bad guy's point of view. They don't care who they're after, be it an individual, be it an organization. What they're after is data. Data is the new oil. And ultimately, they don't care what type of data they gain access to. So ultimately, we're seeing this evolution of different types of attacks. To date, what we've mainly seen is something called a confidentiality attacks, where bad guys are, compromising organizations or individuals, gaining access and using that data and getting access to that data. They're either using that data they compromise to monetize, or they're using it to create other forms of attack. Now, we see these day in and day out in publications around the world and in the news that another attack has happened and the bad guy is holding the organization or potentially the individual to ransom because they've got their data. So that's kind of been up until now. So that's been mainly confidentiality breaches. The next evolution of what we're going to start seeing now and the audience is what I call something called integrity attacks. I've been talking about this for a number of years now. But ultimately, we're in what we call a data-driven world now. Everything we do is about data. We're consuming data. We're generating business decisions based on that we have in front of us. In our personal lives, our IoT devices connected to our wrist, telling us how many steps we've done or whatever. We make personal decision based on that. So the evolution of what we call the attack vector, ultimately, the bad guys are going to be doing something what I call an integrity attack. Basically altering the integrity of data. The problem with integrity attacks, Neil, is unlike confidentiality breaches, you know it's happened. With an integrity attack, if the bad guy stole altering data and we're using that data to make personal decisions or business decisions, we only know when it's too late, way after the attack, that actually the data we were using to make a personal decision in our life or a business decision was actually incorrect. That is the extent of the new world we're about to enter into.
And are you already seeing hints of this? This is going to occur already, are you seeing?
Yeah, so, there's been a number of, small examples where now bad guys are, actually, a couple of cases they've done an attack, initially a confidentiality attack to say, look, we've just breached this organization. And they say they have the data, but what they do then is alter that data. But once they've altered the data, they publicize the data to cause reputational damage to the organization. To say, look, this organization was saying X and Y. However, after they've altered it, they publicize the data and say, actually, what that organization was saying was incorrect. And then it's up to that organization to prove that actually the data that the bad guys publicized was incorrect and they had actually altered the integrity. But it's very damaging, and you can imagine it has a huge impact. A number of those cases certainly over the past 8 to 6 months.
Now, you've also worked with and advised law enforcement and military agencies on cybersecurity, and also been a resource for media such as the BBC World News, CNN, CNBC, and many, many more. But I've got to ask, what are the same mistakes that you see people making again and again and again?
Yeah, it's great. Depending on the audience, I've been in the industry now for getting on for over 20 years with it as well. Ultimately, whenever I go into an organization, I say, the first question I tend to ask is, what is it you're actually trying to protect in your organization? And what shocks me, Neil, is people still don't understand the assets they have in their organization. And ultimately, it's the data that the bad guys want. And what kind of really starts to annoy me, people thankfully are starting to invest and understand, the need for information security and controlling and protecting their organization. But unfortunately, they tend to invest in the wrong areas, because based on the previous conversation we had a minute ago, ultimately the bad guy is after the data. So the first core thing every organization, irrespective of the vertical they're in or the location in the world, is ask themselves is, what type of information or data do I have in my organization? Where is that data? Data could be in many locations now. The technology world is changing. It's gone from being on your own infrastructure into virtual environments, into cloud, into SaaS, into platform as a service. It's everywhere now. And then obviously we've got IoT coming downstream. So the first question is, what am I trying to protect, as in data? Where is that data located? And more importantly, what types of risks am I trying to mitigate with regards to that data? Is it a confidentiality breach? Is it an integrity breach? Am I trying to protect the availability of the data? Am I trying to provide accountability and auditability? And for me, it comes back to people doing the fundamental basics of information security. And for me, that that continues to shock and surprise me, Neil, it doesn't matter the type of organization, is getting to those fundamental basics. Because as an organization, unless you know what you're trying to protect, and moreover, the risks you're trying to mitigate with regards to the data, you're never going to be safe.
And also another trend I notice at home now is more and more people are filling their homes with devices like Amazon Echo and Google Home, and then they've got these devices, they're speaking to them, and then they think, what devices can we add to this? So they're adding lights, speakers, thermostats, as well as their phones, laptops, tablets, etc. So many devices now that there's this IoT time bomb on the horizon, especially now we've got more devices in our home than small businesses had in their offices a few years ago. And the average home network can have 30, 40, 50 devices all connected. But then I read a great story where you advise that you can hack an IoT connected device right at the desk side, in person. I mean, can you share that story with the listeners? Is it similar to the phone Wi-Fi kind of story?
Yeah, so we cut out slightly, Neil, but there's a lot of noise around IoT security at the moment.
Yeah.
And rightly so, yeah. So if we start from the very beginning, we're seeing this new era of technology, and unfortunately, in some cases, we haven't learned from the past. All the things that we should have learned over the past 15 years in, making security default in technology, unfortunately, is not transpiring in a lot of IoT technology out there. You could argue we're going for the first generation, the first wave of IoT devices. Now, thankfully, some of the big names, they understand the importance and the need for privacy and information security. So that's kind of, a bit about, the history and where we're at today. So from a bad guy's point of view, an IoT device has the ability or the potential to be another point of entry, another area to target individuals or organizations. So what IoT is doing is extending what I call the hacker footprint. I could quite easily now go onto the internet, I can do various scans and show you IoT devices that are connected to the internet, which are ultimately connected to someone's home. The internet or those IoT devices would have something called default passwords. We've already had the conversation about passwords. Yeah. So I could quickly take to a website and say, right, what is the default website for a particular device? And we would find it. And then we could use that default password that we've seen and then log into a particular device on the internet, which then takes me into that IoT device in someone's home, and we can traverse from there. So that's one example. Another example is the ability for a bad guy to brute force or use a vulnerability or compromise a vulnerability within an IoT device. But we kind of, we've got to break this down and just be a bit realistic. What is the impact of someone hacking into Neil's internet-enabled kettle at home?
Yeah.
What's the worst thing I'm going to do? I'm going to switch it off, or I'm going to use some electricity. That's if you look at it from a pure risk point of view, that is ultimately the risk to Neil. So that's what I call the upfront risk. But now let's take this one step further. What if I was to hack your kettle at home, but at the same time as doing it, I was able to key used to connect to your Wi-Fi home? Because the manufacturer of the IoT device hasn't encrypted some what I call sensitive information which the kettle needs to connect to Neil's home network. Are you following me?
Yeah, got you.
So ultimately, we've got this diverse risk. We've got the initial upfront risk of, I can hack your IoT device, but ultimately the impact is minimal. But once I'm on that device, if I can start collecting or hoovering up sensitive information, which unfortunately hasn't been protected properly within the IoT device, I could use that information to conduct other forms of attack against you, which potentially has a bigger impact. So essentially, the bad guy could use the IoT device to hack you initially, but then glean that information to conduct another attack against you. Now, that's what I don't really see people explaining that very clearly in the press. So we hear all this news about home devices getting hacked, or I have the potential of IoT devices being hacked. But the residual upfront risk is I can turn that IoT on and off remotely. The actual bigger risk is actually I can potentially look at sensitive information which is stored within that device, take that away from you and use it to conduct other forms of attack against you.
And do you think this, like, it's the fragmented landscape and lack of universal standards that's partly to blame? Because, I could have a branded smart TV versus, I don't know, let's say a webcam that I bought off an auction site from overseas for £5. And there's just no universal standards, is there, for everything that we buy?
Yes, it's a great point. I think with IoT, this, without a doubt, there needs to be minimum standards from a security point of view and a privacy point of view. And I'll come on to a couple of examples in a second. But, I have three boys, I know, living in the UK, if I buy a particular gadget or toy for them, it has a kite mark on it and it's gone through various standards. Surely this should be mandatory now for any IoT-enabled device. We need some minimum standards and security by default, okay? And, those elements could be the ability to, multi-factor authentication, encrypted so the device has its own unique. This is, common first principles information security when designing technology. However, my concern, Neil, is it's those more expensive devices which get sold on. Let's take a car, for example. Yeah. So Neil has a IoT-enabled device or car. You were the first purchaser of that car. Now, when you bought that car, it has an app and you could collect your data, lots of information about how you drive it, how you use it. What about when Neil wants to sell that car on? Yeah. Where is that data? The data's in the car. It's obviously in the car. It's in the previous owner's phone or device. It's in the cloud. Is in the cloud somewhere, because there's a cloud application. It's in a service that the company is servicing it. So suddenly now, Neil's data for that duration of owning that car is in many locations, and there could potentially be some sensitive information. So we need to start thinking about some of the privacy controls around IoT, in addition and alongside the security elements as well, and giving consumers and individuals the right essentially to be forgotten, and them to say, actually, now I've sold my car, I can press one button and delete all that data about me in all the various locations. And that goes not just for a car, but essentially any high-end IoT device.
Absolutely. And another thing that I've noticed as well is if you were to go to your local electrical store on a Saturday afternoon and buy, let's say, a smart TV, fridge and smart kettle, you automatically assume that device will last, let's say, 3 to 5 years. But what you don't think about reading is how long that manufacturer is going to support that device with security patches and upgrades. So could it happen, do you think, that 3 to 4 years down the line, that smart TV, the manufacturer's gone on and creating bigger and brighter and better models, but they're no longer patching the security elements of that TV, and then that becomes a risk? So without a doubt, IoT second-hand market, there's ultimately going to be a big market at some point. Yeah. And the end of life of devices or the particular firmware, without a doubt. We're seeing a lot of noise and potentially a lot of different types of devices out there. They're not doing what I call the first principles and enabling the right security controls by default. So at the moment, downstream in 3-4 years' time, potentially, the problem is far greater, but with far many devices out there with known vulnerabilities due to, end of life, but they're still being used in the wild. So ultimately, going back to my previous comment, from a bad guy's point of view, the attack vector is, growing every single day because of, different ways and our connected lives. So like we've already hinted there, the average home already has more tech and connected devices than small businesses had a few years ago. TVs, laptops, tablets, smartphones, and that's before you start adding all those IoT devices, smart home devices into the mix. But the average home does not have an IT department and certainly not a security expert. I mean, does that kind of thing keep you awake at night? And how can we better educate people about those responsibilities?
So ultimately, in my role is, I'm responsible for, the direction of our technologies, which ultimately, we create technology to be embedded within other technology or other services to prevent these problems. Yeah. Ultimately, from any technology vendor, the ultimate aim is to make the user experience so simple and easy that it's very simple to consume and use. So as part of that design phase, you need what I call security to be transparent. So ultimately, you've got depending on the risks as a technology vendor or an tech vendor, their core objective is user experience. Now, as part of that user experience, they need to ensure that the information security controls and privacy controls are transparent. So what I hope, because the technology is there to protect and solve all these problems right now, Neil, it's really for the tech industry to understand that they need to start taking responsibility and embedding security by default to protect the consumers from security risks and privacy. And it can be done. You can get the two at the same time, apply the appropriate security controls totally transparent to the user. And ultimately, that's going to happen by regulation, standards, or ultimately people will start realizing, and consumers will start asking is, look, if I'm buying your product, I expect it to be secure and there's minimum standards I expect. And, is that going to happen next year? Is that going to happen in 3 years' time? I don't know. When I came up with the concept of cloud-based authentication, everyone said I was crazy. And I went evangelizing around the world, various governments saying, we can solve the password problem by replacing static passwords with one-time passwords. People thought I was crazy. Then suddenly there was a hint that suddenly it's going to become mandatory. We're not quite there yet, but people are starting to realize now if you have a password, you do want to really replace it with a one-time password. And the same goes for any type of data that's being generated by any business or any consumer. Ultimately, it needs to be encrypted and protected with a unique key. Now we're getting into the technicalities, but there's no reason why anyone or any technology vendor, where a consumer or individual is generating data, is not protected by default transparently to the user or the consumer.
I'm glad you mentioned the cloud-based authentication platform you created there. I've read a lot about it, and like you said, you've been evangelizing around the world. I've not read any reports that you're crazy, so that's got to be a good thing. But can you tell me a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so this was going back, most probably 12, 14 years ago now. At the time, in my days of my ethical hacking, one of my specialities was passwords, the ability to get access to passwords, obviously with permission, but to use that to conduct various attacks with permission. And you do that in many ways. You can do that by brute forcing, guessing passwords, or social engineering. Those still fundamental techniques are still used today at a vast scale by bad guys. So my challenge and the objective to meet the actual user need was to say, okay, let's try and replace those passwords, because passwords are painful. There's always been this misconception that a really complicated password is more secure, but in fact it's not. The more complicated you make a password, the less likely an individual is going to remember it, and they're going to write it down. So you go looking for it, and if actually complicated password in clear text where someone enters it, it's no more secure than your first name. Yeah. So ultimately, the core objective is to replace that password with a one-time password. Going back in the day, in order to do that, organizations had to install lots of technology within their business. They had to get devices that generate one-time passwords to individuals, and it was a lot of pain. Not only was there a large upfront cost, there was the operational and hidden cost within an organization. So based on that problem, I came up with the concept, why don't we take all of that complicated technology that a normal organization would have internal to their organization and put it into the cloud? This was the very early days of cloud. At the time, it wasn't even called cloud, it's called managed services. And that was really the start of the journey of where I've ended up today, Neil, was really taking something very complicated and making it very simple for people to consume and use, but ultimately solving the pain the user need. So now if you were to use one-time passwords, you wouldn't have to remember the password. You could have an app on your phone, or you can have a device in your pocket that generated it. And the same goes for ultimately encryption and key management, okay? And that's my role within Gemalto today, is taking those traditionally technical technologies and allowing them, making them very simple for people to consume and use within their own technologies and within their businesses.
Now, before I let you go, though, can you clear something up for me? So if we've got any smug listeners out there that are locked into the Apple ecosystem with an iPhone, a Mac and an iPad, can you confirm that they're not immune from any of the threats or viruses we've talked about today?
Yeah, so I'm a Mac user and I'm a PC user. There is a total misconception that having a Mac, you're more secure than someone else. Again, if the examples I've given you today on, during our conversation, your Mac has Wi-Fi. If I can get your Wi-Fi, or the bad guy can get your Wi-Fi to connect, you're at risk. If you receive a phishing email, okay, you're at risk. Yeah. If a bad guy's to come along with a USB stick and automatically suck out all your data from your PC or your Mac, you're at risk. So the risk is exactly the same. There used to be the concept. People used to say, well, I don't need antivirus on my Mac. A number of Mac users, ultimately over time, viruses and malware and ransomware are just going to become just as prolific on a iOS as they are any other PC. So, to listeners out there, please, please, please don't think because you have a Mac, you're immune to being breached. You're not.
Sleep tight, Mac users. And I'm one of those as well. So, but before I let you go again, can you point the listeners in the right direction of where they can read more about your great work, or contact you if they have any questions about anything that we've talked about today?
Yeah, so from my day life, Gemalto.com, we provide some amazing technologies. We secure some of the most sensitive data in the world, and we enable and we solve the security challenge for all technologies around the world, from IoT to mobile phones to banking to passports to encryption, etc. So we're the world's leader in security. And then also, I tend to blog a lot, and then you can go to my blog, which is jasonhart.co.uk, where you can find me on Twitter. I'm very happy to answer any questions to your audience, and I'd be very, very happy. So you can find me on Twitter at Hart_Jason, and I'd be very happy to help you.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put all those links in the show notes just so people can get to you nice and easy. But more than anything, a big thank you for coming on today and opening my eyes, and I'm sure the listeners' eyes as well. So thanks again for coming on today.
Absolute pleasure, Neil. Thank you for having me today.
Jason may be a former ethical hacker with 22 years' experience in the information security industry, and has used his knowledge and expertise to create technologies that ensure organisations stay one step ahead of risk presented by ongoing advances in these cyber threats and risks that we read every day. But what is most impressive to me is his ability to break down that knowledge and deliver it to audiences in a language that everybody understands. And I think this is one of many reasons why the likes of BBC, ITV, CNN, Fox News, Sky News and BBC World News, etc. all invite him on. I think it's a privilege to have him on the show today, and I'd like to get him on more often to break through that white noise of those headlines and get to the heart of these cybersecurity stories. So if you do have any questions for Jason, send them over to me at techblogwriter@outlook.com, and I'll see if I can get him back on the show in a few months and we can revisit some of those big cybersecurity stories. I think it'd be incredibly valuable if we can deconstruct some of those big stories. But as always, this show is your show too, so let me know your thoughts. I'm conscious that I'm throwing a lot of episodes your way at the moment, so please let me know your thoughts on that. But in the meantime, I've got some great guests lined up, and it's great to have you all on board with me. So a genuine warm thank you from myself for taking the time to choose and listen to this show. But it's time for me to go, so until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.